Hello, everybody. As we are logging in, thank you all for joining us today. I am Joanna White. I am the Assistant Director of Program Scholarships and Awards here at the FSU Alumni Association. I want to thank you for joining us for our first of 4 career services focused webinars in partnership with our renowned FSU Career Center. We are excited to be able to bring you this virtual engagement, as it has been a minute since it may have been a minute since you were on campus with direct access to our professionals in the Career Center. And let's see. I want to give a special thank you to our Alumni Association members who are joining us today. Your commitment to this university and this organization is noticed and appreciated. I would also like to thank our corporate partners for their generous support, which makes programs like this series possible. We are especially grateful to have Golden Key Consulting, LLC, as this year's series presenting sponsor. Thank you so much. And today I'm happy to introduce you all to our presenter and FSU alumna, Christy Manzanis, Senior Assistant Director of Employer Relations at the Career Center. With her are several members of her team, as well as a fellow FSU alumnus, John McFarland of Tal Search Group, to help provide insights on how to refresh and update your current resume. There will be time at the end of the presentation for general Q&A, as well as more specific questions related to your own experience in a breakout room if you would like to join for a smaller group discussion. Without further ado, I will ask that Christy take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Christy Manzanis. I'm so happy to be with you fellow Knowles this evening. After graduating from Florida State University, my heart led me to find a career where I could make a difference in the lives of others. So for over the last 2 decades, I have had the honor to serve students at a private university, a community college, and now I have come home to the one and only Florida State University Career Center. Building connections between employers and students is my primary mission. I lead a team of career liaisons who work with Florida State University science, technology, engineering, and math majors, and then also the College of Business. So some of my team members are here with us tonight. So when I call your name, if you'll give us a wave, that would be awesome. So we have tonight Jean Shortley. She is our liaison to the College of Engineering. And then we have Lauren Sponber and Cam Hatcher, who both work with students from the College of Entrepreneurship and then also the College of Business. When Joanna and I started planning this session, it was important for us to bring in an expert. We knew we wanted someone to bring that employer perspective, the recruiter perspective, so we could really find out for resumes, what's on the mind of the reader, the person that is reviewing your resume and passing you on to that next phase of the process to get an interview. So we have a real treat for you tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome FSU alum and my favorite technology consultant, John McFarland. John, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your organization, Tal Search Group?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy. So I started my career through the FSU Career Center. So I gotta say, great place to get a start. I got a job in New York City working in the financial district, recruiting for Goldman Sachs, all the big banks, all the financial industry. And then I moved to Atlanta, covered the entire spectrum of technology with a large firm there. Moved back to Tallahassee, started a company called Tal, which is we primarily focus on government and Big 5 consulting firms, and then also some smaller private sector companies. But I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and our goal is to connect with people that are in the IT space, and that covers the entire spectrum of IT, since the state of Florida is one of our large clients. I think that having your resume ready is a good thing, and I think this is definitely a good presentation and opportunity to get some questions answered and get your resume tightened up so that when that employer comes knocking, you'll be ready. So thank you, Christy.
All right, so let's talk about our plan for the next hour. We're going to talk about resume resources from the FSU Career Center. And as alumni, you have lifetime access to the Career Center, our resources, our services. I'm going to also tell you if you'd like to get a resume critique, how you can do that. John and I are going to cover what employers say about resumes. Then we're going to talk about best practices for format and content. We're going to give you some Résumé Pro tips. And then I'm going to throw in some bonus additional resources. And we're going to cover those common mistakes, those things we see a lot on resumes. So just so you know, the slide deck will be shared by the Alumni Association. And we ask if you would please hold your questions to the end. And we'll handle those in our breakout rooms, or John and I will stay in the main room to answer questions here as well. All right, so let's talk about the resume resources that are provided by the Career Center. So if you visit our website, and I believe Jean is going to throw some links in the chat for me. So if you want to keep an eye on the chat, you can grab these links there. We have our resume writing guide, and then also our resume ready checklist. So our writing guide is going to be more of a full plan. It's going to give you everything you need to know about crafting a resume. It's going to talk about what's the purpose of a resume, what should be included. So it's a very detailed guide on what your resume should look like. Now the resume ready checklist is going to be a chart that kind of tells you what each section should be on your resume, and then it's going to have you check off each component that should be underneath each of your sections. So those can both be found if you go to career.fsu.edu, excuse me, and we have a tab right there across the top that says alumni. So you can click on that and find both of those resources. If you'd like to get a critique from our office, you're welcome to meet with your career liaison from the college that you graduated from. You're also welcome to attend Résumé Cafe. So in the spring and in the fall, we host 3 different Résumé Cafes where employers give resume critiques. So we do those 2 in-person events, and then we do have a virtual option for Résumé Cafe that you're welcome to attend to. You can certainly come to career advising hours. We have Tuesdays from 4:30 to 7 are virtual hours. And then you can also submit through Career Docs, which is a Canvas course. So if you're a recent alumni and you're still on Canvas, you can enroll that way, and we will review your document and give you some feedback. All right, John, let's talk about what employers have to say about resumes. The National Association of Colleges and Employers is it's a national association, they're in the name, but they do what's called their Job Outlook Survey, and they survey thousands of employers across the nation, across all industries. And they put together a beautiful Job Outlook report that career centers use to tell us what's going on in the mind of employers and what is trending in hiring and interviewing, all that kind of good stuff. So what NACE has looked at in the past year specifically is what skills are most needed, what skills are most sought after by employers. And 86% of employers that took their survey said problem solving was the #1. So what we want to do is make sure that you give clear evidence in your resume that you have those skills. Over 75% of them want to see a candidate's analytical and quantitative teamwork skills. And then also written communication is in that top 4 of skills that employers are looking for. So John, would you like to give us your take on what do you look for on a resume?
Well, typically when I look at a resume, I'm looking for just like on the top 4 here, I mean, you're looking for folks that have experience solving problems, and it's good to specifically identify how you've approached it and what you've done as succinctly as possible. I think that your resume is your first example of your work, so you want to make sure that it is very tight and looks good, and it's addressing the different accomplishments that you've had, and also you want to make sure that it is you can show the progression of what you've done throughout your career. You don't want to just have a summary without any content of where you've done the stuff in the resume, because when I look at a resume, the first place that I go is to the actual content of what they've been doing in the positions progressively through their resume, not necessarily the summary. And most recruiters, when they look at a resume, they're scanning it very quickly. They're looking for specific things. And if they don't see it right off the bat, they typically move on to the next candidate if they're in a high volume situation.
Thank you, John. All right, let's talk about the elements of a resume. And kind of, we're going to start breaking down now the format that we suggest, some best practices for the content, and then we're going to really deep dive into the experience section on your resume. So the identification, that's going to, of course, be your name, your address, your phone number, those kinds of things. It's perfectly acceptable these days to either leave off your physical address or just put your city and state on there. A website, if you're in a creative industry, that's a great way to help bring your resume to life. Your LinkedIn profile is a great thing to put on your resume. Again, that's just going to help bring your document to life. And we're going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn shortly. The profile and the summary, you see that's the second section on your resume. So we're going to kind of talk about when you should use a profile versus when you should use an objective in our next slide. But let's talk about other potential headings. So we know you're going to have your identification. We know you're going to have an experience section. We know you're going to have a profile, a summary, or an objective. But what other sections or areas can you focus your content on? For an academic resume, of course, we look at publications, we look at relevant projects, but also think about how you can demonstrate that you're a well-rounded candidate. And also to bring attention to the diversity that you bring to an employer. You can highlight professional associations, organizations you're involved in, certainly your community involvement. We know that employers are specifically looking for diverse candidates. So that's a great way to let an employer know when they read your resume, something about your diversity through your associations, organizations, and community involvement. Of course, your awards, any presentations you've given at conferences are great to add. Certainly your technical skills, licensures, and certifications. So John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on technical skills and licenses.
All right, well, I'll say this example of the resume, that is a great example of a resume as far as it covers what the person is trying to talk about in their resume. And I think that specifically on certifications, as you gain the industry experience, that's awesome. That's very relevant. And I've seen often where where clients will say, we either want experience or in place of a college education, years of experience. I think that certifications fall into that same category. But if you have the experience and then you can validate it with a certification, I think that is, I think that's showing potential employers that you're not only have the experience, but you're validating it with a certification. So I think that's always a good thing to have. And there's, in the IT space, there's many different certifications that you can get that are specific to your experience. Like for instance, with the state of Florida, for a project manager, they require a PMP certified project manager on the state side as well as on the vendor side, and that was specific to a size like a $10 million or bigger project many years ago with the state. They just basically interpreted that as now everybody that's a project manager with the state needs to have a PMP or a professional project management certification. That would be one example of validating your experience through a certification.
Thank you, John. Let's talk about objectives versus profiles. That very first section on your resume underneath your identification. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about what a profile is, what an objective is, and when are good times to use? How do you choose which one to put on your resume?
So I think an objective is typically geared towards somebody that's just getting into their career because you want to explain to your potential employer what you want to do. It's tailored, and you want to tailor that to the job that you're applying for. So you want to tailor that to the job that you're applying for and the objective, and then you want to also state what kind of career you're seeking, and then what skills and experience you have that are relevant to that. You could also include where you've been and where you want to go in your career. And again, I think an objective is more geared towards a newer candidate, because if you've already got 10 years of experience, you're pretty much already running down your career track. And I think that that's more in line of where you would use a profile or a summary of your experience. Just like an objective, your profile should be customized to match the qualifications of the employer and what they're looking for. And then it also helps with a well-written resume profile because they're concise with the information, and then they can see where you've written it into the profile, and then how it flows down through the rest of your resume.
All right, and I see on this example, John, here that they did quantify some things. So listing those numbers of years of experience there, how important do you think that is to kind of quantify everything on your resume using those numbers?
You hit the nail on the head. I think that quantifying your experience is always good, and doing it in the profile of your resume. Doing it in the profile of your resume, I think, is a good way for someone to quickly see what you've done, and then by backing that experience up through your experience of your various jobs that you've had since then, validates what you put in your overview.
Right. So let's talk about the format of your actual document. So what should your document look like? I'd like for us to take a strategic view of, your resume as if it were a piece of real estate. So we want to look at what is the most important information, and we want to make sure that that's on the first page of your resume. Reverse chronological order is most widely accepted across all industries. So what that means is you're going to list your current experience, your current school you're attending, your current job, and then you're going to work your way backwards through your document. So an employer wants to see what are you doing now, and then flow backwards on what you've done in the past. It's very important that you be consistent on your resume. And what I mean by that is if all of your section titles are in bold, if you use the numerical value for dates. So for example, instead of writing out January 2022, you could have 01/22. So it doesn't matter which format you choose. You just want to make sure you use that same format throughout the document. For things that you want to emphasize, You can put those in italics. You can use your bold, your all capital letters. That helps someone scan the document much quicker. And then also dates. Dates are super important. Employers want to know your full timeline of where you've worked or where you've served at that organization or your community involvement. So make sure you're specific on your date ranges there. And the size of your margins, it does matter. Don't go any smaller than a half an inch. Just in general, your font size for your name should be 16, and then the body of your resume should be 10 to 12 font, so no smaller than 10. And I think what's most important about your format of your document is that you customize it for your target audience. So for example, a creative resume, if you are a graphic designer, if you are in the marketing space at all, your resume will look very different than a technical resume. So we want to take the time to research your industry, and I'm going to give you some resources on how to do that. All right, so let's look at that most important section on your resume, the experience. That's going to be the bulk of your resume. So let's talk about the content there and what should be listed. So for each job you've held or each experience you've had, you're going to want to make sure you include your position title, the name of your organization, the city and the state, and of course, again, that timeline, those dates that you were employed. And then underneath each of those, you're going to list what we call accomplishment statements or PAR statements. And in our next couple slides, we're going to give you some examples of those. And I'm going to actually give you the formula on how to write an accomplishment statement, because that's going to be the bulk. That's the hardest part on your resume, is to take, you know, what do I do in my current role, and how do I word that? So we're going to give you some really good hints and the formula to write those. But I'd like to hear John's perspective on some common mistakes that you see in the experience section on a resume.
Well, first off, one of the things I'll bump up a little bit and talk about dates of employment. I think it's important to put month and year, because whenever I look at a resume and I see somebody's resume says 2001 to 2022, I'm like, there's a gap in there more than likely. So that's why you want to include the month and the year in your resume that way. And if you have a gap, it's okay, just explain it. And you know, it's been more prevalent in the last couple of years than I've seen in a long time. So I would also, you know, some of the common mistakes that I see are people are talking more about the company and the job versus what they're actually doing hands-on. You can do a quick, you know, intro on this company is producing software for law enforcement agencies across the state of Florida. And then you'd want to go in to talk specifically about the technologies that you're hands-on with and using. And then, you know, and you want to actually, and you can talk about in bullet form what you're doing. And then if you don't weave the technology in, and there's more technology than that, you can just have a technologies utilized, include, and list out the technologies. And that goes back to how it chronologically moved through your resume, through your various experiences. So that lines up with what you were talking about in your career summary. So and then, you know, it's also important to quantify what you've done, and if you can show measurable outcomes whenever you can, I think that's very helpful. And then, you know, another common mistake I'll see is people will talk in first person, like I did this, I did that. You don't want to talk in first person. You want to talk about, you know, I presented daily stand-up scrum meetings for a group of 8. So you've just identified the group size of a group you're working with, but you're not talking in first person. There's others. I think it's also critical to make sure that you're, one of the things I see specific with IT is a lot of people will put the technology like .NET, but if you go look it up on Google or jQuery or database administrator, if you just look it up on Google, you can get it right in your resume, because people are paying attention to that. Like, and I know I'm talking technology, so I may be throwing terms out that are not specific to your industry, but I'll often see Unix, which is UNIX, but that's all capital letters. So that's just, stuff that I catch on resumes often. So.
Thank you for bringing that up, John. We're going to talk about keywords in a minute and making sure that, we have the right keywords on your resume. All right, so here is that formula that I promised you. So underneath each job you've held, you're going to describe what your role was there. So instead of copying and pasting your job description or position description, you're going to construct effective experience descriptions. And those are called PAR statements. So we're going to have a project, an action, and a result. So that's our PAR. Or you'll have an accomplishment statement where you'll have an action verb. You'll talk about a skill you've used and the task or the evidence that proves that you have that you are proficient in that skill. So for each of your bullet points, you're going to always start with an action verb. We have a great list of action verbs on our website that you can refer to. And then you're going to focus on skills or projects. And then again, we're going to always quantify those results. So we have a couple examples here, but we're going to give you some more examples in a moment. But I just wanted to, again, John started kind of the thought of applicant tracking systems and the importance of keywords. So we did have some students that were not getting interviews when our new Target opened here in Tallahassee. And the requirement in the job posting said you needed 1 year of guest service experience. But our students were putting on their resume 1 year of customer service experience. So the applicant tracking system did not think they met the minimum requirement because they used the word customer instead of guest. So when you're constructing these, your bullet points, as John talked a little bit about a while ago, we want to make sure you're using the correct keywords or the language that that employer is using. All right, so now let's go into some examples here. So John, I'm going to let you, when you read option 1 and option 2, talk us through which do you prefer and why?
I think it's always good to go with option 2, and at least based on these 2 examples. I think that you want to start with a verb and talk about what you're doing and be specific. And if you can quantify it, which I think if we look at option 1, responsible for sales goals, what are those sales goals? Instead of talking specifically about increasing sales by an average of 12% each year by continually developing ways of reaching new potential customers, that breaks down a couple different pieces of what you're actually doing. You're not only increasing your sales, but you're also identifying what you're doing to reach the new potential, or that you're reaching out to new potential customers. So that shows that you've got the you're not only you're stating more than just you're meeting your sales goals. And then on the second example, responsible for hiring and training new staff. The second option, reduce employee turnover by 23% by implementing new training techniques and creating and motivating bonus structure. I think that quantifies that what that person is doing and how that training experience is helping to drive that process versus a vague statement that says responsible for hiring and training new staff. Obviously, if you've got that experience, it's good, but the more you can flesh it out, the better.
All right, and here are just a couple more examples here. So one of the ways I like to think about it is we don't want to tell the reader the obvious. You know, if you're an event coordinator, Joanna, if we were looking at your resume, we know you coordinate events. So it kind of baffles the reader sometimes when you would just put a bullet point that says, you know, responsible for events or planned events. Whereas I want you to tell me something I don't know. The large events that you've planned, the size of those events. So again, all those quantifiable results tell me so much more than just a general statement there. But let's talk about some Résumé Pro tips. John and I put our brains together and came up with some pro tips for you all. So the first thing is to analyze the job posting for keywords. So when you're starting the application process, what you can do is you can use a free word cloud generator. There's lots of them out there. You can copy and paste the job posting into the word cloud generator, and then it will make you a word cloud with all the keywords. And then when you are customizing your document, your resume, you'll want to make sure that those keywords are included. And I'm going to give you some statistics in a minute about how people forget sometimes to put their keywords in there. And then you'll want to prioritize your sections. So although your identification has to be the top of your resume, the next is for sure going to be your profile or your summary or your objective, but the other sections are interchangeable. So if you are a recent grad and you are applying for a position that requires a certain degree, you would want to list your education section first. If you're like me and you've been out in the workforce for a long time, I put my education at the end of my resume. So you can move those sections around based on what's most important to that employer. So John, I'd love to hear you explain to us a little bit about what an applicant tracking system is and how resumes play well and don't play so well into the ATS.
Okay, so ATS, applicant tracking system, just about all recruiting firms have them, and CalSearch, my company, utilizes a ATS called Bullhorn, which they are the largest in the recruiting industry. But there are, when we're able to drop and drag a resume into the ATS system, and it automatically and pulls all the information out of the resume and populates the database. And what's good about that is if you have a nice clean resume that is similar to the ones that we've looked at, all that information goes into the ATS quite well. But if you like break it up into columns, or you have the cleaner your resume is, the easier it is for it to get pulled into the database. And that's, you know, Fortune 500 companies use them. We work with one out of Atlanta, and their system, you know, they have systems that are out completely pulling stuff off of various job boards and stuff. So you want your resume to be in a format that is easily pulled into the resume system. So I think that's why you want to have a nice clean resume. You don't want to have a lot of you don't want to break it up into a bunch of different text boxes, all that stuff. I think that's a good part of just having a nice, clean, formatted resume. Christy, you got anything else to add about FSUs?
Yes, so we have had applicants that have applied to positions within the Career Center, and they didn't meet, according to HR, they did not meet the minimum requirements for the position. So we were requiring a certain degree, a master's degree and 3 years of experience. But when those candidates reached out to me and said, hey, why didn't I get an interview? And I look at their resume, I can add it up, and it did meet the minimum requirements. So they should have been passed on from human resources to me as the hiring manager to have an opportunity to interview. So it's very important that on your document, you clearly let the applicant tracking system know that you meet those minimum qualifications. So that's again when those numbers come into play. But for your cover letter, I know for us here at FSU, we read that cover letter. It's what we look at before we look at a resume. Now, that is not necessarily true for all other industries. So just kind of, again, know your audience. My philosophy is write a letter. Tell me your why. Talk to me about why you want to come work for my organization and part of my team. And if they don't read the cover letter, then they don't read it. There was no harm in writing it, but I think it's always better to present the most complete application you can. Our rule of thumb is for you to only include relevant experience on your resume, and that means relevant to the job you are applying for. And then also it's common to only go back 10 years on your resume. But John, I thought you had an instance where you did want them or recommend that they list other positions for background checks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I think it's important to have your chronological experience on your resume. I agree with, you don't need to go back more than 10 years. I really think employers are looking at the last 5 years of your experience. So that's the most relevant part, but you want to list out all your past employers, even if you just say, and I'm talking about from college on. You don't necessarily need to include, jobs that you had while you're in college, but from college on, you want to include everything that you did so that if you get a background check pulled by a potential employer, one of the things they look at is job history. And so you want to make sure that that experience is complete and succinct so that it matches what comes back in the background check. And then the other piece on that is, I guess that's on the background check piece is I've seen people put their degree on their resume and they haven't graduated yet. And an example of that, we had a young man, he had some experience working at one of the large retailers doing tech support. We got him a job with a Fortune 500 company. We asked him multiple times about his degree. He told us he had his degree. He told the Fortune 500 he had the degree. When he got the background check done, it came back and he said he didn't have the degree, and the company pulled the offer. And that was a life-changing opportunity for that young man. And I was crushed, and I know he was crushed. So that's why you want to be as accurate about what you put on your resume as possible. And my thought is I typically say take the degree off if you don't have one, but if you're pursuing it, you can do that as well and saying expect to graduate this date.
All right, so John, talk to us a little bit about LinkedIn and how having a robust and active profile. You can see from the slide here, your chances of getting an interview are 71% higher by having that LinkedIn presence.
I think LinkedIn is a great tool. I think just about every recruiting firm and large company has paid versions of LinkedIn. We pay, I'm embarrassed to say how much for the access that we have for LinkedIn. It gives us a global view of all the people that are in LinkedIn. And so that's one of the main search, that's one of the main search databases where a lot of people are looking for candidates. And I think that it's important you want to have at least 500 connections because it makes it look like you have a network of people. LinkedIn does not track after 500 connections, but the other piece on that is if you connect with, they call them lions, and they'll have that in their profile. Those are people that have massive networks. So if you connect with people that have 500 or more connections, that expands your network immensely to the third level connections that you'll have. There's also an open to work thing that you can put on your LinkedIn profile that only people that have like recruiting firms have access to. Not everybody will see that. So that is a heads up to recruiters to say, hey, I'm looking for my next gig. The other piece is if you can get a couple of references on it, people talking about your work experience and how it was to work with you, that is always extremely helpful as well. LinkedIn is they are definitely on the forefront of what's going on. And I think posting potential information as well, adding content to LinkedIn that's specific to what you're trying to focus on, that's also good. Also, if you're looking to connect with a specific employer, if you go to your LinkedIn profiles and send somebody an email and say, hey, I'm really interested in your company and have done some research, talk about their experience and how you want to get that experience, that's going to potentially be a foot in the door for that manager to say, hey, here's a candidate that connected with me on LinkedIn, took the extra step to get in front of us. So I think LinkedIn is a great tool and should definitely be a priority for everyone as far as using it as for networking with other folks. And you don't want to network with folks when you need a job. You want to have been doing it progressively all along. So.
All right, and I'll make sure that John and I put our LinkedIn in the chat because we would love to connect with you all. Just make sure you send us a note and tell us where you met us. All right, John, so we are going to fly through these next few slides because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So John just touched on it, how important your professional network is. You don't want to be building your network when you're looking for a job. Now is the time to build your network. We talked about earlier researching your industry specific formats or needs for resumes. So you can do that easily online. I found this great Indeed article that was written recently, and it kind of goes over a lot of the tips that John and I just covered. And then I also found a YouTuber. His name is Jeff Sue. He has a YouTube channel, and one of the videos was excellent. Write an incredible resume, 5 golden rules. So if you want to view that, he's got some great content there. Now for our common mistakes, of course, being disorganized, misspellings, typos, those things are just a big turnoff to the reader. Describing your job duties instead of accomplishments is just not going to be as memorable or as convincing to the reader. And John, I'll let you talk a little bit about buzzwords. I think we've covered exaggerating the truth. And then the length of the resume. Will you talk about those two things?
Yeah, so I think that, when you don't want to put stuff on your resume like I'm a guru in this or I'm a rock star. I think, when you say that, you're identifying, you should be able to explain that more through the content of your resume. If you're saying you're a rock star, I'm like, okay, next candidate. But that's, I think, good not to buzzwords or cliches. And then as far as a resume goes, I think Christy and I probably are a little bit not necessarily on the same page. I think that a 3 to 5 page or 2 to 5 page resume, if you've got a ton of experience, is okay. But realistically, I think a 3-page resume is pretty, you should be able to explain what you've been doing in the last 5 years and then kind of abbreviate the time after that. So what are your thoughts, Christy?
Yeah, well, we love a 1-page resume in the Career Center, but certainly once you're an experienced professional, I think you can have as many pages as you need. The important thing to remember is that I want to see the most important information on page 1, because I'm not going to get to page 2 if you don't tell me what I'm looking for in page 1. So I think that's the key there. So that concludes our presentation portion. We want to really focus on your questions. So before I throw it back to Joanna with the Alumni Association, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, John, for being a part of this presentation tonight. Your insight is just invaluable, and we just so appreciate you being here. And could you share with us any roles that you're currently looking to hire for at TalSearch Group, or how can we get in touch with you if we wanted to talk to you about your organization?
So I'm open to chatting with anybody and everybody. If you got specific questions, I'm happy to answer them offline after our presentation. We are consistently hiring software developers, project managers, business analysts. Those are probably the top 3 positions we see coming across our desk the most. But we have basically the type, we have law enforcement help desk folks working with us, to business intelligence folks, to network engineers, security stuff. I mean, we're pretty much all IT. So anything, if you're in IT, come talk to us. So thank you.
All right, Joanna, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Yeah, so what we're gonna have available is some breakout rooms, so that way we're not all in one giant room trying to ask questions. So Jean and Cameron and Lauren will be in some of the breakout room spaces. So you can feel free to jump in with them. You can stay in this general room session that can be considered like a 4th breakout. But we have that being broadcasted now, so you can all hopefully be able to pick a room. And then they will meet you in there. And that's just if you want to have some smaller discussion. If you don't feel that you have a question and you're just curious to see what everyone else may say, you can stay in the general room. I know, Christy, we had a couple questions come in through the chat while we were talking. Dania asked, I think this was back when we were talking about if you should, like the option 1, option 2 on like how to say, like I ran events, like, and then all those different details. She had just asked, should you use this template for each and every bullet point on your position?
Yes. Yes. So each bullet point should start with that action verb and then talk about a project and a result, or an action verb, and then you talk about a skill or a task. So yeah, you would use that formula. So say under your current role, so if I was writing my resume as Senior Assistant Director of Employer Relations, I would probably have 10 bullet statements that describe my accomplishments for my job now. And each one of those 10 would start with an action verb, list a project, and then a result.
I agree with that. I think a resume should demonstrate actions taken and the outcomes to add to that. So.
All right, and then there was a second question. If anyone else has any questions and they would like to do the raise hand feature, so we call on you next, you'll be able to speak, or you can drop it in the chat as well. There was another question that came in on, what if you've been in the same job for the last 10 years? Do you only include that one job as an experience, or how do you buff up your resume at that point?
Well, I think the question is, have you had different roles within that organization? So for example, I was once an admissions counselor, then an associate director of admissions, then a director of admissions. So I would list Kaiser University, and I would have the entire timeline I worked there. So from 2001 to 2008, and I would include those months there too for you, John. And then I would list career progression, and I would have each of those roles. So the first one listed would be Director of Admissions, and then my bullet points, and then Associate Director of Admissions, then the bullet points. So you could see the progression of being at that one employer for so long. I hope that answers the question.
I would say that Christy nailed that, but if you've been at the same position for 10 years, but you have other positions before that, if they're relevant to what you're looking to do, then you'd want to include specific experience in those previous jobs. But if, as Christy said, just talk about how you've chronologically moved through that position and different requirements, but you'd still want to include previous positions on your resume from my perspective, if you had them.
And then I saw one that just came in. Charity asked a good question, and I deal with this a lot too. How would you show different roles or promoted roles at a single company? And do you need to have different dates for the different roles in addition to that time company?
I think that you can have the company's name at the top of your resume with the dates like that you started and that you're still there presently. And then you would work through the resume as far as you could break down the dates throughout that job description of where you bumped into different positions and showing where you've moved up within the organization. So, you know, if you did something if it was a 10-year track, for the first 2 years you were an associate, then you moved to a manager, and so progressively throughout that, and then you'd want to have the dates in there and the experience that you had in each of those roles.
I just saw another one come through. Let me find it. What about if you have one major thing to point out, but it doesn't fit under one specific category, and they listed an example? One academic publication, one life award, did a fundraising event, wrote a book. Do you want to make 4 categories for that? Or how would you recommend listing it on the resume?
Yeah, how to group those things. I would say to make and try to include some of those in your profile or your summary. So you could list your award there, certainly your publication you could tie into there, or you could have a more broad category of just accomplishments. And then you could list your award, your publication, and list everything there. Does that sound like what you do, John?
I think that is one way I typically would tell folks to do an additional experience at the end of your resume to say, and you know, that's where you can talk about the things that you're doing, you know, the awards that you may have received, a publication that you've done, those type of things. And if the publication was tied to one of your specific jobs, then I would include it in that. But if it's extra, I would just add it to additional experience. That shows that you've got other things going on than just work. And I think it would be relevant in that area.
There was a good one that just came in. I know what they're talking about. I don't remember what it stands for, but the ATS, does that have difficulty pulling information from a resume formatted in an invisible table?
That's when you say invisible table, I have heard of folks that put at the bottom of their resume every technology that they could possibly get, and then they make it the same color font as the paper. And I'm not sure if that picks up or not, but I've heard that it does. And I don't know if that's accurate. I haven't researched it myself, so, but I have heard of folks doing that. So interesting question for sure.
Let's see. I'm trying to read several at a time. There's one on here about if you can recommend a small group or career center advisor, a specific person for an on-the-go mom. Is there a specific person she should contact maybe that we could drop in the chat?
Okay, the best person to contact would be the liaison that is from the college that you graduated from. So I can pop that link in the chat to where you can find who are the liaisons we have right now, and then you can reach out to them directly. I'll also pop my email in the chat, and you feel free to reach out to me, and I'll make sure you get to the right person.
All right. Do you believe that there's a perceived page limit for resumes? I know you guys differed on that topic.
I read resumes all day, every day. So I think, I'll go back to what I said before. I'm focusing on the last 5 years of experience, unless they have a specific experience that was previous to that I need to reference for the potential client that we're putting them in with. I think that, resumes are if they get too long, it starts getting, and that's another thing. I'll see resumes. This is another pro tip. I'll see resumes where they state the same job description repeatedly over different positions. And that's, I think that the more succinct you can be, and 3 to 5 page resume, I think is good. If you get over that, you're not necessarily doing yourself justice.
Do you ever see people including, or would you like to see people including hobbies or outside activities on their resume? Maybe if it's not just volunteer work, but something different than that.
We recommend.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Christy.
we
I'll let you take it.
recommend that for students. We recommend that for students, but for professionals, we feel like hobbies and interests should be weaved into your professional associations or your community involvement. But do you feel differently about that, John?
I would agree with you. I mean, it's, I'd love to know that you mountain bike, so maybe we could go ride bikes, but that can come up after the fact, after we're working together. So I think, to your point, it needs to be specific to, I think it's more from a professional standpoint than hobbies and stuff like that. I would agree with Christy.
Well, that's all the questions that were dropped. Oh, look at me speaking too soon. We got one last one. We'll take one last question. Do you have any tips to quantify the results or functions of a lobbyist or governmental affairs professional? Since most of those are relationship based.
I think and I am not a lobbyist. However, I think that quantifying how you've helped clients in specific, and that comes down to how a lot of times lobbyists are writing a lot. So identifying your ability to communicate, and a lobbyist is communicating what is in the bet. And let me say this carefully. They are always advocating for their client. However, they've got to be accurate to what's accurate. So I think that's a very good skill that can transfer into other areas for sure. To quantify it, I think I would identify specific things that you've helped push through the legislature potentially, or if you're doing it at the executive level, then talk specifically about how you've helped clients meet their internal goals. I mean, I could think about that. If you want to reach out to me, I'll think on it and then give you some more thoughts on it.
Okay. Well, that about wraps it up for us. There we go. Sorry. We just dropped in the chat the link to our next webinar series, which will be on May 10th. So I appreciate everyone who joined us here tonight. If you have any additional questions, feel free. You can reach out to myself or Christy, and we can get you connected with the appropriate person. But yeah, that's really it. We really appreciate everyone who stuck around. Thank you, Christy, and everyone from the Career Center and John for joining us today. If you have any questions, like I said, I can drop my email in the chat and hang out here for just another minute or two, but we will get all of this posted online and either email it to you once it's ready. We'll send a brief survey out tomorrow, but I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you for hanging out with us after work today. Thank you, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Go Knowles.
Go
Yes.
Knowles. All right.
Very nice. All right. Thanks, y'all. I'm going to head
Bye.
out.
See y'all later. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Christy.